26 December 2025. I have about 5 projects on my bench right now. However, I just received the Sully 870 ejector system for the good old Remington 870. As I understand, the issue with Remington is they're no longer a company. And that seems to be perhaps why it's hard to find certain factory parts. However, aftermarket seems to be doing quite well. And in fact, the Sully ejector system is, has the potential of being easier to install and perhaps be a bit stronger and have more longevity than the original factory part. Now, this is the Remington factory ejector. In my case, the spring was the issue. My ejector is still solid and not broken and fine. The spring, I don't know whether it warped or whatnot, but it quit really being very useful years ago. And so for years, I have known that I needed to address this issue. But once again, the factory, the Remington 870 ejector and spring are installed, held in place by rivets. And from what I had seen in videos and read, the rivets are a bit daunting to get quite correct. The Sully simply is a milled piece with a one-piece spring that isn't held in place by the rivet. It's actually held in place by the milled ejector itself, being pinched between it and the receiver. And at least in theory, it seems to have a potential to perform better. Now, I have found one other video on the Sully ejector system, and the gentleman installing the Sully into his 870, he had issues. Now, this gentleman seemed very, very knowledgeable, and he said he was installing it into an older 870. This 870, mine, if my memory serves correct, I bought this thing new in 2009. So all things considered, this is a fairly recent 870. And my experience with the Sully ejector system is it's dropped right in. This gentleman, this other video that I've found, he had to remove some material from the back side of the ejector, of the Sully ejector, in order to get the bolt to stop binding on and actually clear. I haven't had that issue. Now, I will show you what little binding that I perceive. So if we close the bolt and then begin to open it, all right here it unlocks, and then right here there is a little bit of drag. How little? Well, watch. Right there. We've unlocked, and there's that drag. Right there. One more time. That's it. That is the extent of drag that seems to be on the bolt. And if my memory serves correct, the factory parts, it had the same feel. And if you know anything about running a 12 gauge pump gun, that little bit of drag is not going to cause any issues. So let's see here. If you go to this website, they have some information on the product, but they do not have torque specs. Not that I found. Perhaps they're there somewhere, perhaps I missed them. This is the torque specs that I will be using. I do not recommend that you use my torque specs. I recommend you go find your own, but this is the torque specs that I'll be using. When you go to install your Sully 870 ejector system, remove the barrel, remove the fore end, the action bar, the bolt, remove the trigger and hammer assembly. Have this thing stripped, and in removing the factory ejector and or spring, it's a riveted in part. Be gentle. You do not want to bend your receiver or warp your receiver. It shouldn't take a ridiculous amount of force to push these rivets back out. That's all the more I'm going to say about that. When you go to install this thing, right there it is. It's right down in there, right down there. Right here's this spot, right there. When you go to install this, the front screw is longer than the back screw. The front screw, if you install it first, don't install it the whole way, get it started, get it threaded in a few turns, 2-3 turns. That's it. Leave the whole thing loose, then start the back one. Be careful. The way that this entire thing is, it is very easy to cross thread it. So be certain of your angles and how it is threading on. However, start this, leave it loose, then apply the rear one. Once they are both positively started and definitely not cross threaded, then draw them up evenly. All right. So, now, actually, on the Sully ejector spring, I'll bring you right back here. I don't know, I'm ahead of myself. If you go to this website, once you get to the tail end of all the information that they have there, you will find a portion where they talk about decreasing the spring pressure. Decreasing the spring pressure. This spring is a one piece. It goes through this slot, and the back side of the spring sits in a pocket behind, on the back side of this ejector. They talk about grabbing a hold of the spring with a pair of pliers at a certain point back down in here and bending it in a particular way to decrease the amount of spring pressure. I guess some people have issues with too vigorous of ejection. However, in my case, I want it, just in testing, I want it a little bit more vigorous ejection. So I did everything, but I bent it the other way. In theory, increasing the amount of spring pressure. I do not recommend that you do that because they don't recommend that you do that. But that's what I did. Let's go ahead and see. Now, this gun is not fully assembled. However, in theory, everything that you need to work this portion of the operation is here and assembled. So let's go ahead and put a empty shell in there. That wasn't a whole lot of force applied. That popped right out. Let's do one. Let's do 3 times. Oh yeah, that was a nice one. All right, yeah. We'll go ahead and do a loaded shell. This gun can't fire moment. Not hopefully. Oh yeah, there we go. Seems to be working, and that's at least as for my purposes. That's a lot better than it was performing for me over this last summer. There is one other thing to mention on the well, it's a safety pro tidbit. Let me show you. So if we go ahead and strip this down, if we go ahead, come on now, and strip our receiver down. This is the state in which you will want the receiver to be to remove the factory ejector and spring and install the Sully. And actually first, go ahead, I'll show you. These screws, they do sit a bit proud. They do sit slightly proud. Oh, come on. Well, we had a moment there. They do sit just a little proud of the receiver. However, even with putting a side saddle on here, I don't think it's going to be much of an issue. I think it will work just fine. I may have to dish out 2 points there slightly, but I think it will be just fine. However, as a slight extra safety pro tip, when you remove your forearm tube, and action bar, this is the action bar. This right here is what holds the bolt. When you remove this action bar, that action bar is sitting down in this channel right here, and it's sliding back and forth. There's a 90-degree angle down in there. Right here, right at the tip of my pencil, right here, this whole length. This, it's not razor sharp, but it's fairly sharp. And if you've got your fingers up in here and you're pressing on certain things and sliding them back and forth, you're apt to cut yourself. So, it happened to me, and back in the day, years ago, and so I'm just putting that out there as a little warno. At the moment, I still have yet to fully assemble this thing and go fire it, but from what I can see, I think it's working, should work just fine. And assuming that you see no more follow-up videos on this particular product, you can go ahead and assume that I've had success with it.